Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to Led to Gold. This is the podcast devoted to discussing all things growth and wellness. And it's a little passion project of mine. So if you have been here before, maybe you know a little bit about the things we tend to talk about, namely growth and wellness, but lots of topics within that, obviously. And if you're new here, welcome in. I'm so happy to have you. I am always hoping to have this podcast and sort of my just whole Led to Gold brand, if you want to call it that. I'm always hoping to have it reach new people. And I do think these are really important conversations to be had. So if you're here and you're new, welcome. I hope you get something out of it. I hope that this brings a little bit of light into your day. And if you enjoy it, if you like what we're talking about here, I would so appreciate if you would take a second to rate this episode wherever you are listening to it. Maybe share with a friend if you know anyone who might enjoy the conversations that we're having. And today's episode is unique because I mentioned I was going to do this a couple weeks ago, but I notice from time to time when I go back and actually listen to parts of old episodes that there are things that I would like to say more about. And it took me a while to really sit with what I wanted to talk more about. I knew that the patriarchy was going to be one of them. And I have an episode 15 called Why Haven't We Smashed the Patriarchy Yet? If you haven't listened to that, that might be some helpful context for one of the conversations that we are going to have today. But the other two, I was kind of like, well, I'm not quite sure what it is. I knew that there were some things left unsaid or some things that I wanted to follow up on, but I just couldn't quite grasp what they were. And in all honesty, it was only today that I really actually figured it out. And I do think that there are some common threads in all three of these topics that we are just going to kind of follow up on and talk a little bit more about. So my hope is that I can provide enough context just in this episode to give you a sense of what the initial conversation was. But if you are interested, I will link all of the old episodes in the show notes for you. So you can go back and listen to the full conversation that we've had before if you're interested in doing that. So without further ado, today we are continuing the conversations on boundaries, the patriarchy, and women in the outdoors. So it's going to be a fun one. And hopefully it doesn't go on too long, but there are going to be a couple of sections to this episode. So if there are any of those three that you're a little bit more interested in, I should also have timestamps in the show notes as well. So you can check that out and see what interests you. But we are going to start first and foremost with the conversation around boundaries. And for context, episode 15, which I'm now realizing is the same episode that we discussed the patriarchy, why haven't we smashed the patriarchy yet? I did have a little blip in there about some lessons that I had recently learned in what it means to set a boundary and also what it means to be faced with a boundary by someone else. So we're going to get into all of that today, but ultimately I wanted to start this episode off with just some, I guess, ladder context, because as you may know, if you're somebody who's somewhat entrenched in pop culture, I don't really consider myself to be one of those people, but I see stories of things every now and again. You might be familiar with the recent kind of scandal of Jonah Hill and his ex-girlfriend, where he used therapy speak and he used specifically boundaries setting as a way to try to manipulate and control his ex. So I don't think I really need to go into a whole lot of detail around that, but ultimately he just used boundaries in a way that boundaries are not supposed to be used. And a lot of people were pretty upset by it because it seems to be something that's relatively easy to do. Even though therapy speak and going to therapy in general is a wonderful thing, it can also be manipulated. Some of the language that you use when you go to therapy, when you start having quote unquote open conversations and get a little bit more vulnerable with the people in your life, not just your therapist, some bad players may take this language and use it in a way that it's not meant to be used. So I won't go into full context about that example, but what I want to drive home from that example and from just this discourse of boundaries in general, in the previous episode that we talked about this, I mentioned feeling as if even when it is intended to be useful and beneficial, sometimes boundary setting can go a little bit out of hand. It can get a little bit intense. It can get a little bit confusing and murky. And I do believe that people are starting to kind of change the discourse on boundary setting. It's becoming almost more of a buzzword than it is a beneficial practice in people's lives. So what I want to drive home, and this is what we're really going to get into in continuing this conversation, is that ultimately boundaries are meant to protect you, and as an individual, protect you, not to change the behavior or character of another person. Okay, so boundaries are about you. They are not about the other person necessarily. Obviously, you are giving a boundary to a person, you are setting a boundary with another person, but the reason you should do so is because of something in your life, in your mental capabilities, that is hindering the relationship. So, to get into that a little bit more, I wanted to give a few examples and share some moments in my life where this has happened. So, again, when you are setting a boundary with someone, it's because, or it should be because something in your dynamic together is either making you uncomfortable or making you feel maybe even unsafe or just in general like unheard. Something is amiss, right? There's a behavior that they are showing that it's not as simple as you not liking the behavior. I want to make that very clear. It's not as simple as you not liking the behavior. It is that their behavior or something that they said or something that they routinely do makes you feel uncomfortable. So, the way that we set a boundary is very important, and the words that we use in which to set a boundary are very, very, very important. What Jonah Hill did not do correctly is, I'm really not even going to use this example because he, like I just said, took the language of setting a boundary and put it in a situation in which a boundary was not set. He was just trying to control what his ex did and who she hung out with. So not the same thing. But my point is, when you're giving a boundary, when you're setting one, you need to be careful about the way you phrase it. And I'll tell you why. There's a certain coded language, and this is also a part of therapy. This is also a slight continuation of a conversation in one of my blog posts, actually two of them, The Art of Revealing. So I have The Art of Revealing and The Art of Revealing Part 2. So in that blog post, I mentioned the three stages of communication, which were initially created by David Data. He was an intimacy and relationship coach I want to say he started in the 80s. So slightly dated, but I love the three stages of communication. I believe this is something that every single partnership, and I'm not just talking relationships, like romantic relationships, I'm talking like every relationship that you have, you should practice these to an extent. I mean, it gets complicated, but let me get into it. Stage 1 communication is reflective of a bad boundary setting. It can happen when we are setting a boundary incorrectly. It can happen like the Jonah Hill example where he was saying, if you don't stop hanging out with these people, I can't date you. These are my quote unquote boundaries for this relationship. If you're going to hang out with dudes who surf and unstable women, then I can't be in a relationship with you. That's my boundary. You have to stop doing what you're doing. So that in and of itself brings up a lot of not quite right with boundaries. First off, like we said, boundaries are meant to protect you. And I really can't think of a way to reframe what he wanted in a way that would be seen as a healthy boundary, because that's just not what he was trying to do. Anyway, he was using a form of what we would call stage 1 communication. And stage 1 communication is kind of inherently defensive, inherently closed off, close-hearted, and in some cases even kind of dishonest. We're shielding ourselves ultimately when we are using stage 1 communication. It is something that is meant to get the other person's attention, but not necessarily with love, rather with resentment or with, hey, like, I don't like what you're doing and I don't know how to respond to it in a healthy way, so I'm just going to take it out on you, either by yelling at you or giving you the cold shoulder or being dismissive and generally just being closed off. Now, stage 2 communication is essentially a form of therapy speak. It's where somebody does something upsetting, something that we don't like, and we go, hey, when you, and I'm using Jonah Hill here, when you hang out with unstable women, whatever that means, it makes me upset. It's identifying the action that the person did that made you feel a certain way and then voicing that to that person. So we use the stages of communication with discussing conflict within two people. What I'm getting at here in this conversation is that an appropriate boundary setting has to be done with stage 2 communication or better. We really can't set a healthy boundary using stage 1 because those two things just don't mix. We really can't be full of resentment and set a boundary without it potentially hurting the other person. Let me give some clear examples, and hopefully that will kind of clear all of this up. The language is coded in a way that you identify the way that this action makes you feel, and then the other person knows what you would like for them to do differently. So here's an example. Your partner, let's say your partner, it's a new relationship, relatively new relationship, maybe you're 2 months in or something, and your partner talks about their ex more than you would like for them to. I feel like this is something that happens pretty often, and it happens for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of it, oftentimes, at least with like women that I've talked to, it boils down to not having a lot of trust from their last relationship. So they're still feeling a little bit wounded, and there's still a lot of fear of like, oh, well, my ex did this. What if you also do this? Like, I don't want you to do this thing that my ex did. Anyway, we don't have to get into the nitty gritty of why your partner is doing this, but that's the example. They are talking about their ex a lot, and it makes you uncomfortable. So it's super easy, in theory, to voice that. You would say, hey, it honestly makes me pretty uncomfortable when you compare our relationship to your previous one. I understand why you do this, but I would really appreciate it if we could find a way to talk about us and our relationship without bringing them into the picture. Maybe we can find a way to just kind of navigate these conversations without bringing them up, because it just doesn't feel right to me. That is a stage 2 communicative boundary, and that, I believe, is really how it should be done. Now, it's easier said than done, because I think there are a lot of steps that it takes to get to that point of like, okay, how does it make me feel when they talk about their ex? Why do I think they're doing this? Are they doing it out of malice? Are they doing it to make me jealous or to make me feel like I'm a shitty partner? No, I don't think so. Okay, well, I know that they're not doing this to hurt me, so I shouldn't be afraid of bringing this up with them in a way that doesn't feel like I'm attacking them. That's ultimately what we want to do with a boundary. A bad example of that, a Jonah Hill example of that would be, I need you to stop talking about your ex or we can't be together. Even worse than that would be along the lines of, oh, here we go talking about your ex again, or like saying a side comment as they're doing it. Even worse than that would be letting the conversation happen, letting them talk about the thing that you don't want them to talk about, and then giving them the cold shoulder later, and they ask what's wrong, and you go, nothing, it's fine. Nothing's wrong. I told you nothing's wrong. You know, it's that. That's stage one. That is like pinnacle stage one. Anything that is coded as dismissiveness, refusal to talk about something, or, you know, just like, yeah, giving that person a weird change of emotion without explaining why. It's stage one is essentially a lack of communication. There is something amiss. And then it kind of tends to, you know, once you do finally come to a head about like, well, obviously something's wrong. Obviously something's wrong. You're acting weird. What is it? Well, you always do this. You always talk about your ex. I'm sick of it. No. And then you still have that kind of, you always do this. It's always you. So that's where that gets a little problematic. And it's a subtle change, in all honesty, because it's like you're saying the same thing in both situations. I don't like it when you talk about your ex. I don't want you to talk about your ex. But the way you say it makes all the difference. I think the key is with the stage 2 communication, you're starting with yourself. You're saying, I feel uncomfortable when this happens, not you need to stop doing this thing that makes me uncomfortable. It's a subtle change. It means the same thing at the end of the day, but it makes a world of difference how you say it. And the last thing I really want to say about boundaries and boundary setting is the whole reason we do this. And in all honesty, the conversation that I talked about in episode 15 where somebody set a boundary with me and it freaked me out a little bit. After the fact, we talked about this. Me and that friend talked about it again. And this is something that I guess I knew, but I had never really heard it voiced, and it clicked and it made so much sense for me. And now I truly feel like I am over the hurdle of being afraid of when people set boundaries with me. The whole reason we set boundaries should ultimately be because you like the person, you respect that person, and you want a relationship with that person. We set boundaries because it's like, hey, I really enjoy having you as a friend, having you as a partner, having you in my life. But this thing is hindering that. So if we can find a way to work around it, if we can find a way to, you know, come to some sort of compromise even, then that would just make it all the better. And I understand that there are like different levels of severity with this. There's complications with this, you know, like what if you set a boundary and they still break it? That brings other things into the conversation. It does. And I know that. These things get messy. And that's, again, something that I talked about in episode 15 is that cold, hard boundaries may not exist. I guess inherently they kind of don't because, yeah, humans are messy. We make mistakes. We may still break boundaries even though we love that person and we don't mean to. It could still happen. Does that mean that we end the friendship, end the relationship? It really all depends. on the individual. So I'm not going to be the one to diagnose that for anybody, but, just keep in consideration the ultimate reason why we want to set them is because we like that person. We want them to stay in our lives. So what are we going to need to work through in order for that to happen and happen in a beneficial way? All right. The next talking point, the next conversation that I would like to continue with you all is around the patriarchy. And for context, truly at the end of episode 15, I started kind of riffing about toxic masculinity and how the patriarchy hurts everyone. I know that this is something that is really becoming clear, especially with the coming out of the Barbie movie, which we are absolutely 1000% about to talk about. And I'm super excited because I loved the Barbie movie. But that episode came out before I saw the movie, before the movie even came out. And this is something that's been on my mind. It's something that I am well aware of, that the patriarchy hurts everyone. But listening back on that episode, I realized that I didn't do the best job explaining what I meant by that. I used one kind of riffy off the cuff example about Elon Musk and how, he's got so much power and so much money and there ain't no way in hell that man is actually truly happy and fulfilled. But I'm going to be so honest. And, I don't know the man. I don't know what he's going through. I don't know. Maybe he goes to therapy. Maybe he's a very healthy, well-established man. I doubt it. But I don't know. And I don't want to assume things about specific people like that. So I would love to continue that conversation and get more in depth in a way that makes a little bit more sense and that we can think about more universally rather than just speculating about rich, white, male billionaires. So let's talk about Barbie. Let's talk about Barbie. Here's one thing I will say, because without giving anything away, I really can't fully get into this conversation in the way that I would like to. If you have not seen the Barbie movie yet and you do not want spoilers, there is a timestamp in the show notes that you can head to skip anything that you don't want to hear about the Barbie movie. So that'll take you just a couple minutes down the road. If you would like to, go check that out so you don't get any spoilers. But from here on out, you have been warned. I don't know if you have seen, we're getting into a lot of pop culture in this episode today, which I was not really expecting, but here we are. If you've been around the internet, you have probably seen a couple quips about Barbie where men are upset about it because some people found the movie to be anti-man. I even have people in my personal life, not a friend, but sort of like a friend of a friend or an acquaintance from high school, if you will, who posted just this honestly hysterical, scathing review of the movie after he saw it. Just talking about how the movie didn't give any room for both sides of the political spectrum to discuss and And, without getting too far into my own personal views about that, I'm like, buddy, have you heard of Greta Gerwig? Because I don't think you have, if that's your take on the movie. Anyway, I want to be abundantly clear for anybody who has seen the movie, maybe didn't get it, maybe thought it was a little bit over the top. I do think it's glaringly obvious that the movie is not anti-man, but it is indeed anti-patriarchy. I want to also extend a little bit of grace because I can understand where people may have thought it was anti-man. And I'm going to talk about that too. But it is anti-patriarchy. I want to talk about why. And then I also want to talk about how we see this idea in the real world and why this happens. And this is just a theory. I am a high school English teacher. I don't study this stuff. So I'm sure there are more complex and more deep-rooted things than what we will get into in discussion today. But upon watching the movie and upon thinking about this more and more as I've gotten older, as I have discovered my confidence in being a woman and loving being a woman. Just some things that I've noticed. So anyway, how do we see the trope of anti-patriarchy in the Barbie movie? At the end, this is, I think, the most obvious scene where this happens. At the very end, pretty much the very end, Mr. Mattel, who's played by Will Ferrell, is in Barbie Land just after all of this craziness happened and the Barbies voted to keep Barbie Land as Barbie Land and to not give it over to the Kens. So effectively smashing the patriarchy within Barbie Land. Mr. Mattel, once everybody is kind of done having their conversations, they're done learning about each other and like feeling good, the conflict has effectively ended. Mr. Mattel wants Barbie Land to go back to normal. He kind of like approaches the whole town and is like, hey, all right, well, what do you say we just snap our fingers and act like none of this ever happened? Let's just go back to normal. And President Barbie says, Mr. Mattel, I actually don't think we want to do that. I think we want to keep things the way they are now, having learned our lesson. So the Kens realized they felt very purposeless. And I want to get into more detail on that. Just before all of this, when we're kind of in the midst of the conflict, we have the scene where Ken realizes that, what is it? Is it the Kendom or Kenland? I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, when he realizes that Barbie Land is not going to belong to the Kens, they lost the vote. That's not going to happen. He runs up to Barbie's room and cries on the bed, and it's really dramatic and sad. But then Barbie follows him and we realize why he's so sad and what he's experiencing. And he kind of lets it all out. He becomes vulnerable with her for a minute. And it's a pretty short scene. I think, truthfully, I do think more could have been done to emphasize this point. But the characters, especially Barbie, learn how hard trying to establish a patriarchy was on Ken. He realizes in that moment that that's not even really what he wanted anyway. Like, his goal was not to be this like overarching evil man. That's never what he wanted. What he wanted, or what he thought he wanted, was Barbie. Because his entire life, or his entire existence, I don't know if we can call it a life because he's not alive. His entire existence, he's been led to believe that Barbie is the only thing for him. Like, he was made to be with Barbie. He was made for Barbie. And he makes that abundantly clear in saying, well, it's always been Barbie and Ken. Like, I'm just an extension of you. I only exist because of you. So all this time, he has been led to believe that you are my purpose. And the fact that Barbie, her character, didn't really feel the same way about him. She didn't love him. She just saw him as a friend, and that never changes. She realizes that, oh, I've been kind of treating you like shit. Like, I never really saw your perspective on this. I never understood that, like, you have only felt like you're having an existence because of me, and I am just out here doing whatever the fuck I want because I'm Barbie. That's not fair. Shit, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So they both realize that this whole system is wrong. This is all gone wrong. So eventually Barbie says, I think you need to figure out who is Ken. Like, what are the other things that bring you happiness besides me, besides living for me? What else do you like to do? What makes you Ken? Because it's not me. So that's the scene. That's the moment. And again, this is where I'm going to say, like, I can sort of kind of sympathize with people who saw the movie as very anti-men, because it spent a lot more time kind of painting all of the Kens as like dumb and purposeless than it did on that message of like, oh, my life is not all for Barbie. Like, I do need to figure out what makes me happy and what makes me feel purposeful besides another person, because that's not healthy. We all know that. That's my only real critique of the movie, is that it spent more time on the sort of like dumb bimbo Ken than it did on like the lessons that the Kens ultimately learn. So the whole shtick, right, is that Ken ultimately realizes, oh, it's not that I wanted to lead a patriarchy. It's not even that I wanted Barbie. It's that I wanted to feel like I had a purpose. I wanted to feel fulfilled in that purpose. And he never, ever did until the very end of the movie. He never felt fulfilled in a purpose. Which also brings up the funny part of him being like, I can't even work in the real world. I don't know how to swim. My job is beach. I can't even swim. Anyway, that's just a side note. But let's talk about how this corresponds to the real world and how this corresponds to actual patriarchy, real world patriarchy, and real world, though I hate the terms toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, you know what I mean when I say that. So let's talk about that. I want to get into a little bit of polarity theory here, which, again, pulling from another episode 16 with my brother. We had a very, very short conversation on what polarity is and what it might look like. And just another quick little disclaimer here. A lot of polarity work has some work to do in its gendered terms. To be blatantly honest, it is hard to discuss without using he and she. So I do want to say I recognize that this works in any kind of person, non-binary, trans, like it does not matter. It does not matter who you are, but the language is pretty gendered. So I just want to make that clear that this is for anybody to practice and to look at. Here's the gist, okay? And this is a trope that we see in Barbie. Polarity theory says that the masculine person, that would be Ken, is fulfilled by purpose, right? He wants to lead and he wants to provide and he wants to be trusted. So when we see his role in the movie and we attach this lens to it, we recognize that he doesn't feel any of these things. He's not leading because men, Kens, don't lead in the Barbie movie. The Barbies lead. He's not providing anything. In fact, he doesn't own a home as far as we understand. In fact, we don't even know where the Kens go at the end of the day. We don't know where they live. And Barbie says that herself. And it's not that he's not trusted, but when we think of this in a real world context, let's just say if you are a straight man, and I'm not saying all men feel this way, but it makes you feel good when your partner trusts you and when your partner knows that you're going to take care of them and like trusts in your ability to take care of them. That is kind of the stereotypical masculine desire. On the flip side, the feminine is fulfilled by love and by energy and by just like goodness. I've always heard it being said that the feminine just kind of wants to experience everything all the time. Just so much love and so much passion and so much energy. And it's just like, we have so much of that within ourselves and we need a place to express it. We need space and people in our lives who will allow us to express it. So exploration, excitement, just like all of those good feelings. We want all of it all the time and we never want it to end. We just want eternity, right? And we all want freedom in different contexts. I think the best way that I could explain it as far as polarity theory goes is that the masculine wants freedom from obligation. Like he wants freedom to explore his purpose and to like go out and get the thing. Whereas the feminine wants freedom to embody all that she's feeling and all that she wants to do. She wants to have the space, right? And the safety to express and to live out all of that energy. But they exist in kind of slightly different ways, which we don't have to go into today. I just wanted to state that. Here's where I think the polarity theory and the tropes that we see in Barbie all correspond into what we see in our real world as toxic patriarchy and what makes patriarchy painful and bad for everyone. This is continuing that conversation from episode 15. When let's just say the masculine feels purposeless, when the patriarchy, the people who run the patriarchy, when they feel purposeless, when they feel as though they are not providing, they are not leading, and they are not being trusted. This is a big one. That's a really big one right now. That's when signs of toxic masculinity begin to show up, because it's a need to like almost overcompensate for not feeling trusted, not feeling like you're living out your purpose, and not feeling like you're able to live by your purpose as a masculine person. I think we all can kind of imagine like what that stereotypical toxic masculine person looks like, but the things that immediately come to mind for me are seizing power and forcing it, you know, being cold or closed off. We have that trope of like, oh, men nowadays are too vulnerable, men shouldn't cry, you know, like that whole thing. And I'm very happy to say that I don't think that is as common as a stereotype nowadays, but it is still out there. So that men shouldn't cry, men shouldn't feel their feelings or express their feelings. Playing games, that's a big one. Being deceitful, kind of like lying or trying to like manipulate your power so you can get more of it. Or entitlement. Those are all sort of forms of toxic masculinity that I think of. And these are things that we see in a patriarchal society that is losing its grip. That's where we're at, because women can live on their own nowadays. Women can be financially successful without living with a partner. They can have and raise children. They can be mothers without the help of a partner. Truly. We can do the whole mothering process without another person if we are financially healthy enough to do so. So in that way, it might be possible that the overall masculine energy of Earth is feeling a little bit purposeless, a little bit unneeded, which is not great. That, in theory, leads to toxic masculine traits, right? And I mean, honestly, just think about this for a second in a way smaller scale. Think about this between two people, right? If I'm thinking about me and my partner, right? And I am in a cis heteronormative relationship, but it's something I've noticed where if I talk to my partner as if I don't trust him, and maybe here's an even more specific example, I kind of make fun of him sometimes because he's a Libra and it's stupid, but I'm like, oh, you're so indecisive. And I mean, he knows that he can be indecisive, but if I say too much about that, or if even worse, if I like get upset at him for being indecisive, that immediately makes him feel like he's not trusted. Like I don't trust him to make a decision for us. And that can be really demasculating, and it doesn't feel good. I know that. That's why I try not to do it. But you see what I mean? Like if I did enough of that, if I made fun of him enough consistently for being indecisive or being too slow, or, you know, anything that derives from his ability to lead us in relationship together, or to feel like he can provide for me, because ultimately I know that he's a predominantly masculine person, and that's what he wants to do for me. He wants to be able to feel like he can provide for me, like he can take care of me, like he can lead us both. So if I make him feel like he's not doing a good enough job of that, that's going to lead to some resentment. That's going to lead to some coldness. That's going to potentially lead to some toxic masculine traits, right? Now for the toxic feminine. So same sort of idea. If a feminine person cannot really feel free to express and to like relinquish all of their energy, if they don't feel like they can kind of follow that intuitive urge to just like let go, express what they want to express, be vulnerable, be excited, explore all the things that they want to explore. If a feminine being can't do that and feel safe to do that, then we're going to have the toxic feminine traits come out. We're going to have that inability to trust. A similar type of playing games to see if we really can trust, testing somebody, right? The insecurity that like seeps really deep into relationships and ends up coming out onto the relationship, right? Like projection, the constant need for validation and for reassurance. And as I'm talking about this, it's quite interesting actually how paralleled the toxic masculine and toxic feminine traits are, because they all stem from a place of insecurity, right? Insecurity either with following your purpose and fulfilling your purpose and feeling needed, versus insecurity in expression, insecurity in following your intuition. Both of these things are problems that everybody faces. And I also want to make that abundantly clear. If you're not familiar with polarity theory, everybody has masculine and feminine. Everybody. You could be the straightest dude, but you still have a feminine aspect to you. So everybody deals with both. Everybody has insecurities of both. And likely everybody has just a twinge, at least, of the toxic traits. So when we resent each other, when we do not trust each other, when we try with everything we've got to hold people's freedom above their heads, take away their autonomy, take away their ability to take care of themselves, the ability to provide for themselves or for someone else, that's when we have the patriarchy at its worst. That is when we have the patriarchy that we now have that hurts everybody. And it hurts everybody, I'm saying, because these are the things that come about. We don't trust the people in our world who are masculine. We don't trust the masculine. That is a big one right now. I think that's why, in a way, we are seeing so many of these bodily autonomy things being redacted. Why we are seeing so many leaders of education who are not even educators, but that's a conversation for another day, being so afraid of the LGBTQ plus conversation and ripping away students' ability to understand their own fucking bodies. That stems from this toxic patriarchy, because we do not trust each other. And when we do not trust each other, when we point fingers and call everybody else the person that is causing the harm, or you're not doing this correctly, or you're not doing this correctly, and it's a whole catch-22, and it ends up in a place where we're at now, where nobody trusts anybody. That's why I believe it's gotten as bad as it has gotten. That's why I believe we're seeing so many of these toxic qualities just like seeping out of, it feels like, every pore of the universe, right? And I am getting a little bit in the weeds here, but my ultimate statement with continuing this conversation is to ultimately just show what these traits are, why the patriarchy is toxic, and ultimately what we can do in our own lives, starting small, to maybe minimize some of the damage. So the thing that I ultimately want to leave us with in this portion of the episode is just to say, recognize. First off, I think it's healthy to recognize how you identify. You know, and again, we all have masculine and feminine within us, but are you a predominantly masculine person? Are you a predominantly feminine person? In other words, are you more attracted to the idea of purpose or of expression? That can tend to help us decide. And if you feel very in the middle, that's great too. But recognize when you feel like you are either purposeless or not trusted. Feel into when you do not feel free to express your true self, when you do not feel free to explore the things you want to explore, when you feel trapped. These are the moments in life where you may be able to kind of look around and figure out what is making me feel this way, or who is making me feel this way, and how can I have a conversation? How can I change the dynamic to where I do feel more purposeful, where I do feel trusted, where I do feel expressive and allowed to express. And these are things that we can start to do in our lives to help us get back on the right track and navigate a healthy society. I was about to say like a healthy patriarchy, but I don't know if that's exactly where we want to go with the conversation, but nonetheless, like at the end of the Barbie movie where he's like, I miss Barbie, I miss my friend Barbie. And then we just, we start to see them all work together once again. That's the ultimate goal. All right. The final conversation for today's episode has to do with women in the outdoors. And this was the conversation that I couldn't quite place. I knew that there was something missing from the topics that I had kind of already had in my head to chat more about. But this was the one that kind of like went under the radar for me. And I'm sure there are more, but this one I'm excited about because I feel like it really provides for a thread to everything else that we've talked about today. So, speaking of the patriarchy and of feminine and masculine qualities, there are some parallels to just the landscape of nature as a whole on this planet that I do want to just provide a little bit more information on and how I feel that this relates to women in particular. So, a couple things before I dive straight into it. I want to, first of all, mention that I totally, absolutely think everybody on the planet needs to reestablish their relationship with nature if they are not already doing so. I'm not saying we have to go like live outside and live off the grid, but we do absolutely need to have a positive relationship with Mother Earth. If we are somebody who cares about the climate crisis, if we are people who are passionate about making sure that we are doing all we can to minimize the damage of the climate crisis and try to do better as a whole collective in the future and in the near future, because we know that this is a dire situation that we're in, it's something that we need to cultivate. I really, truly, strongly believe that you cannot carry out that mission of wanting to do better by the planet if you are not strongly tying your life to nature herself, exploring nature, spending time outdoors, doing things outdoors, finding hobbies, going for walks, observing, truly just observing the world, the natural world around you. I don't think you can have one without the other. I really don't. First of all, we are all nature. That is something that I have been saying for several episodes now because it is and has become such an abundant truth to me, even just in the past few months, in the past year. We are nature. There is no separation. We are nature. And I think that that brings this conversation about even more intensely, because we could say that all day long, but what does that really mean? Well, for women, I want us women to start to really sit with the fact and recognize the fact that our bodies are a microcosm of the earth. And this might be getting a little bit metaphorical, but not really. Not really. We have the ability to shed. We have the ability to create and birth. Like, life comes from us, right? Life comes from earth too. All over the place. Life comes from nature. There's a great Shakespeare quote from Romeo and Juliet. I think it goes, the earth is a womb and a tomb. But truly thinking about that, the earth is a womb. She cultivates all of this life and then she discards it. We have the microcosm of the same cycle that we have on earth, seasons, right? And admittedly, this is something that I want to get more familiar with. I am not very familiar with the terminology and the traits that go along with a woman's menstrual cycle, which, saying that out loud, is honestly kind of embarrassing. Like, I really wish that I did understand it better as a woman with a vulva. This is something that I should probably know, but I don't. I really don't. Like, I know terms like the luteal phase, but I don't know when it is. I don't really know what it means or what happens during that phase. But that's for me to figure out. The point of this conversation is just to say that integrating that idea, that belief, that we are a microcosm of the planet that we live on, we are nature, is so vital, in my opinion, to reestablishing a love and an appreciation for our own selves and our own bodies. Appreciating, no matter what the patriarchy is trying to do, no matter what people are trying to take away as far as our bodily autonomy, we can create life. Like, whether or not you want to is a different conversation, but just the fact that we can is incredible, is amazing, is such a miracle. Truly, is such a miracle. And in the same way, the ability, the fact that we are living on a planet, on an orb in space that creates and sustains and takes away life, that is a miracle. That is so fucking cool. And what I want to start to harness in my own life, but in lives of women that I know too, is just that knowledge and that level of appreciation for ourselves, because we are that. Like, we have that within us, and that I just can't find the words to express how amazing and how miraculous that is. So this is really ultimately a short conversation, but something that I wanted to pull from episode 10 when I was chatting with my friend Kay about reintegrating ourselves with nature and how we can really honestly like reestablish that relationship, but find joy in it also. This is a way to do that. And it's so easy. Honestly, it's just a matter of establishing this as a belief. You don't even really have to do anything other than recognize the similarities that are there. And then I suppose once you're there, once you kind of see this parallel and you realize that this is truth, that this is beautiful and miraculous and amazing, and choose to see yourself as that, I think it makes it all the more easy to actually physically reintegrate with Mother Earth, to go out there, to enjoy nature, to enjoy hot days, to not take it for granted ever, because we are one in the same. We are one and the same. Nadia and I had a short conversation on that just the other week, episode 18, just kind of understanding that we are truly all connected. Like, this is part of that too. We are connected to nature. Nature is connected to us. There is no separation. There just is no separation. We're here. We're physically on this planet. We're in it. We're all the way in it. And I guess just the final thing to sit on with that conversation is, you know, the next time you're sort of, whether you're a woman, I don't care, anybody, the next time that you are sitting on your relationship to the outdoors and to nature and like, should I be doing more? Like, is this even really that much of a big deal? I just want to remind you that, again, if you're a person who cares about the climate crisis, I believe we've got to take these two things hand in hand. If there's something that you want to do, or if you even just are considering it and you want to be somebody who is involved in that work, we've got to go here too. We've got to a degree, I'm not saying you have to be spiritual, but to a degree, we have to integrate that level of connection with Mother Earth, because it's there. It's there. That doesn't even have to be a spiritual conversation. I think it's a very also scientific fact, maybe not fact, but a scientific statement to say that, like, we are nature. We are. I'm so tired of the discourse that humans are separate from animals. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but we are animals. That is a fact. And I have heard it said in context many different ways, many different times in my life, that like humans are somehow separate from the animal kingdom. And that's just not true. Like, we're not special. We're not special. We belong in this community as much as every other creature, as much as every other plant, everything that exists on this earth. We are as much a part of it. We are not separate. I don't know. It's just kind of a baffling conversation to me. And this could go so much deeper and so much longer, but I want to just leave it at that. We are nature. Women in particular, get familiar with your cycles, get familiar with Earth's cycles, and recognize how beautiful they are in all of their many changes and facets. How the seasons change wherever you live, even if you don't really have like super prominent seasons. There are changes throughout the year. What are they? How do they show up? And how do you connect with them? Even just trying to think about it in that way can strengthen our relationship to nature. And that's really important work to be doing right now. So that's really all I have to say on that. Let's finish up today's episode with a little game of We're Not Really Strangers, and we will see if the card that I choose aligns with any of the conversations that we've had today. Usually I get lucky and they do. So let's just see what we've got. Okay, here we go. What's been the best thing for your mental health lately? Get specific. Okay, I might be misremembering this. I think I got the opposite of this question on a previous episode, which was like, what's been the worst thing for your mental health lately? But nonetheless, the best thing for my mental health lately has been to drop the expectations of myself. I think that's the best way to describe what I'm trying to describe. But for so long, I think I also, again, kind of continuing conversations, I talked about this on the previous episode about just like, not everything has to be a thing and that it's okay to rest. Like, all of these ideas kind of centered around the belief that for so long, the belief that I've held that like I have to be productive. I have to make meaning happen everywhere I go. Everything has to be special. Everything has to be a thing, right? And I'm just kind of starting to let that go and recognize that it's totally okay to do that. And it feels really actually quite nice to do that. I'm not going to go out and say that like, oh, it feels amazing now that I'm like letting myself sleep in later than maybe I used to want to. But to just be okay with the fact that I did and not beat myself up over it is honestly making a world of difference right now. I'm kind of struggling to find a way to condense that, but I guess in short, it's been great for me to just kind of like drop the expectations that I've so long held over my own head. Drop the expectations. It ain't that serious. It just ain't that serious. All is well. So yeah, that's been mine. And I would love to know what yours have been as of late. What has been the best thing for your mental health? I might even post this as a question on Instagram when this episode comes out. I think that would be a fun little project to try together. So I'll do that. Yay! Good conversations, y'all. Thanks so much for being here. And as per usual, even though I already said it, I'm going to say it again. If you want to go one step further, if you have any ideas, thoughts, questions, concerns, comments, send me an email at hello.ledtogold@gmail.com. You can also DM me on Instagram at led.to.gold. All of the links, all of the things are in the show notes for you if you feel so inclined to reach out. And I would love to hear from you, truly. So thanks again for being here. I love you so much. And come back in 2 weeks. We're going to see what the next episode holds. I'll be here. Talk to you soon. Bye.